Hello there. This is Dr. Beth Johnnson. I am the field veterinarian for the State Veterinarian's Office associated with the Kentucky Department of Ag, and just wanted to give a brief summary of our Scrapie program here in Kentucky, and also highlight some of the areas that are, there was a new ruling that was passed in April of 2019, and just wanted to touch base with, share some of the information that became available in April. Scrapie is a fatal degenerative disease affecting the central nervous system of sheep and goats. There's no cure or treatment for Scrapie. The cause of Scrapie is unknown, but it's thought to be caused by an infectious misfolded protein called a prion. The prion actually is these proteins actually are responsible for causing bovine spongiform encephalopathy, or BSE, and also chronic wasting disease in deer. Scrapie usually affects sheep and goats between the ages of 2 and 5 years of age. Clinical signs are due to infecting the central nervous system. The affected animals will show behavioral changes such as nervousness, aggression. They have a very intense rubbing, and you'll see them scraping up against the fence lines, the walls, and it progresses to where they become incoordinated and then unable to rise, which with death. Some of the real subclinical signs may just be tremors. You know, you just see the head shaking a little bit. You can see them standing in the corner, head pressing, or just have their heads looking up, stargazing. You can also see significant weight loss, obviously, with they have a decreased appetite, just excessive wool pulling. They just act like they're extremely nervous, and just very, very hypersensitive to sounds, to voices, but those are some of the clinical signs you'll see. Transmission is generally from mother to offspring. That's why it's so extremely important with the Scrapie program that we identify these animals so that we can do traces, go back, and if we do identify an animal with Scrapie, we can actually go back and try to find, with record keeping, we can go back and try to find their offspring and test them as well. The offspring can also become infected through ingestion of placental fluids or allantoic fluids, and it also the prion can enter through any cut in the skin. Generally, the prion invades the lymphatic system, and primarily in the intestinal area, enters the bloodstream, and it eventually settles in the brain of the animal. Diagnosis. This is where the problem arises, is that most Scrapie is diagnosed on the kill floor, either through a necropsy or in slaughter. Sheep are routinely checked for Scrapie through a slaughter facility, a USDA inspected slaughter facility. Samples are taken, and a lot of times that's how a Scrapie animal is identified. They also can be identified prior to death, utilizing a rectal biopsy sample and sometimes a third eyelid or lymphoid tissue. One thing that is kind of nice with sheep is that you can do genotype testing. This requires just pulling a simple blood sample from a sheep. Not really perfected yet in goats, but with the DNA, there's a codon 136 and a codon 171 that code for susceptibility or resistance to Scrapie. When you're purchasing, especially purebred sheep, when you're purchasing animals, try to get purchase animals that have been genotype tested, especially rams. And you want them to be AARR or AAQR. You definitely do not want a ram to be such a V or Q. If they have V or Q, stay away from them. They are genetically susceptible. As this slide depicts, any genotype other than AARR or AAQR is susceptible. The key to National Scrapie Program is that we must be able to officially identify Scrapie positive animals and be able to perform traces to other exposed sheep and goats. And as I stated at the first of the slides, is that in April of this year, there was a new ruling passed down for the National Scrapie Eradication Program, which will be abbreviated further on as NSEP. The key points to the Kentucky Scrapie Program is all sheep and goats, regardless of age, breed, sex, must have a Scrapie tag applied in their ear prior to unloading at a livestock market, flea market, swap meet, etc. Any sheep and goats being moved as an intact group to a slaughter establishment may be moved with an owner shipper statement. This is new for the 2019, and what that means, and then it's generally it's animals under 18 months of age that are being moved as an intact group to a slaughter facility. They can move without official ID, but they must be moved with an owner shipper statement, and we'll discuss that a little further on. Some of the key points to the rule changes is that the federal ID and record keeping requirements are the same for sheep and goats. Used to be that they didn't require goats to have as stringent requirements as sheep, and now they are the same. And once again, the sheep and goats moving in slaughter channels or moving without official ID to a slaughter facility must have an owner hauler or shipper statement with a group lot identification, which I'll go into a little bit more detail about what a group lot identification is as well. The new standard does allow La Manchas or earless goats to have a durable collar or neck chain or strap affixed to their neck with an official Scrapie tag applied, but the one requirement is that it cannot be removed without removing the tag. In other words, it has to be almost a permanent neck chain or strap. It can't be a little clip-on collar that can be easily unclipped. It has to be able to be on that animal and not be removed except by being cut off. Markets may only use back tags. A lot of markets use back tags on their animals. From here on out, the markets can only use back tags as official ID for direct to slaughter movements of earless animals and mature buck goats that are determined too dangerous to ear tag. And that's a new ruling as well. The new standards allow the use of a durable collar or neck chain strap through which an official Scrapie tag is applied that cannot be removed without removing the ear tag. I want to really stress that because I've had a lot of, when I'm at a market, producers think that they can bring these earless animals in with a string around the goat's neck that has a Scrapie tag on it, and that really is not durable enough because another goat could easily chew that off. So anyways, just to reiterate, sheep and goats that are only identified with an official tattoo or electronic implanted ID must be ear tagged if moved through a market, unless it is a special breeding stock cell where the tattoos and the EIDs will be documented, such as with registration papers. This is also extremely important in that, there have, in the past, you could bring an animal to a livestock market and they just have a tattoo, and you had papers with them. Well, oftentimes those papers get lost. They don't continue to accompany the animal, and so there's no way to trace that animal once the papers are lost. So, and we'll talk a little bit more about tattoos here in a little bit as well. Okay, an owner, hauler, or shipper statement. I want to go in detail what is required here, and then I'm going to give an example. It is a signed written statement by the owner or hauler that includes the name, address, and phone number of the owner. If the address is different for the hauler, it needs to be on there as well. The date the animals were moved, the flock identification number, which is with your Scrapie tag. For example, in Kentucky, it'll be KY1234, something like that. You can also use a premise ID number, a national premise ID number that is assigned to the flock or premises of the animals. If moving individually unidentified animals or other animals required to move with the group lot identification number, the group lot identification number and any information required to officially identify the animals must be on that statement. It also must include the number of animals that are being moved, the species, is it a sheep, is it a goat, the breed, if you know it. If you don't know the breed, for sheep, just put the face color, put whether they're hair sheep, wool sheep. For goats, state whether they're milk goats, fiber goats, such as Angoras, or meat type goats. Must be recorded. And then where they're going to needs to be the name and address of point of origin, if different from the owner's address, which it should be, and the destination name and address. Okay, and as you look through this, it kind of looks like the same things that are required for a certificate of veterinary inspection, and it is. The only essential difference is it doesn't have to be signed by an accredited veterinarian. It can be signed by the owner or the hauler. Here is an example that we have on our website at the State Veterinarian's Office. And this is an owner-shipper statement, and this is used for cattle as well as it can be used for sheep or goats. And as you can see, it states the destination, owner name, and the shipper, which would be the hauler, his name and their name and address, and then what type of animals they are. Okay? And this is where you would put the number of animals that are being moved. Okay, so what is a group lot identification number? Well, it can be a flock ID number. It can be a standardized national premise identification number, or a location identification number, followed by the date the group of animals were assembled. For example, if you were shipping animals out of a Kentucky premise, the flock ID would be KY1234. And then the date would be in the month, the date, and the year. So, and it just like January 1st, 2019 is what is the example here. If more than one group is created on the same date, a sequential number will be added to the end of the GIN, such as in all these, the flock ID needs to be separated from the date by a hyphen. If you put a sequential number on it, you would, after the date, you would put a hyphen and put another number there to identify each group. The National Scrapie Eradication Program, flock ID number, this is unique for each owner's location. It varies in number of digits and always starts with the state postal abbreviation, such as Kentucky is KY. It must be assigned by the state or the APHIS VS office in your state. In Kentucky, it is assigned by the APHIS VS office. And then these flock ID numbers are held in the state and Scrapie program databases. The flock ID represents a group of animals that shows associated with one or more locations. For example, an owner can have different locations that he has animals at, but he's identified by his flock ID. And that's what distinguishes a flock ID from a premises identification number. Premises identification number identifies that one premise, and an owner could have several premise identification numbers, whereas they would only have one flock ID number. It's required, you must have a flock ID number if you want to order any Scrapie tags from a national distributor. You must have this flock ID number. And you can use the flock ID to tattoo animals. Once again, the tattoos are not accepted in our state for livestock markets or flea markets or swap meet. One of the requirements is they are phasing out the metal tags, and they will no longer be available after 2020. If you want to order some of the metal tags, you can call National Banded Tag Company and order them. But if you are a brand new producer and want to get your flock ID number, you can receive 80 free plastic tags from APHIS or USDA. When you contact USDA to get your flock ID number assigned, state that you are a new producer and you've never received tags before, and you can receive these 80 free plastic tags. Once after you receive, if you need to reorder, you will have to purchase them. And I'll have a website where you can purchase tags at. Standard national premise identification number. Why is it different from the flock ID? As I stated, it identifies the premise that these animals are located at, or an owner has, a farm that an owner has. If he leases other land and runs animals off of a different or owns a different plot, then he wants to use the PIN number on his owner-shipper statement, then that area needs to have its own unique premises identification number. And it's a 7-digit alphanumeric alphanumeric number. An example would be 01AB2CD. It's a very random number that is assigned through the database, and there's not really any rhyme or reason how they generate the numbers, but it is a unique number. But it identifies the land that the animals are being raised on. If you want to order RFID tags, radio frequency identification tags, which are the 840, they're the 15-digit 840 tags, and they are now available for the Scrapie program. You will have to have a PIN number to order those. And so make sure that you have registered, and you can call our office to get a PIN number. We cannot assign the flock ID numbers, but we can assign PIN numbers. And the website down below has some more information about PIN numbers. What has changed for the goats? As we stated, earless goats can now have a collar but the collar has to be such that it cannot be removed off the animal without being cut. And the back tags, if a back tag is applied, it's for slaughter only. And the back tags are applied near the pole of the animal, and that they they can utilize back tags for earless goats, and also bucks that are too dangerous to ear tag. And I've seen a few of those. What are the official ID requirements within Kentucky? Any sheep or goat must have official identification, for example, a scrapie tag, prior to being unloaded at a livestock market, flea market, swap meet, etc., regardless of how old they are, what breed they are, or sex. This is a little bit different from the national requirements, which allow wethers under 18 months of age not to be officially ID'd if they're going straight to slaughter. If a group of sheep or goats is being transported directly to slaughter and are under 18 months of age, they may move without official identification with an owner shipper statement. I've already stated this. I just want to reiterate this. If they're over 18 months of age, they must be officially identified. And if they're under 18 months of age and intact, in other words, bucks or does, then they must be officially identified unless they're going straight to slaughter. Any sheep or goat where there's a change of ownership, they're sexually intact, and they're over 18 months of age, must be officially identified. In Kentucky, all animals must be officially identified if they are going to be shown. One of the rulings is sheep and goats move for exhibition, except wethers under 18 months of age. That does not apply for Kentucky. That's a national ruling. As it states below, states may have more stringent ID regulations. And we also, if you are showing within the state, we require a certificate of veterinary inspection. And it's good for the calendar year. In other words, if your veterinarian showed up at your farm on January 2nd or January 1st of 2019 and wrote your health certificate or CBI, that is good until December 31st of 2019. All right. Any potential breeding sheep and goats are required to be identified prior to leaving the farm or ranch on which they were born or where they currently reside. In other words, if you are selling breeding stock, they must be officially identified with the scrapie tag, or if they're registered, tattooed with the tattoo, and the registration certificate must accompany that animal when it is sold. This includes baby kids, baby lambs, and rams, bucks, does, ewes, anything that's going to be used for breeding. Federal exception for individual ID of sheep of any age. Animals moved for management purposes, for example, grazing, without change of ownership and without commingling with animals from other flocks, can move on a owner shipper statement. Once again, that's the statement that just states where the animals are going to be. Example, moved for grazing. List the number of animals that are going, what type of animals they are, and it is signed by the owner or the hauler. Federal exceptions for individual ID of sheep under 18 months of age in slaughter channels and wethers under 18 months of age. This is national ruling. Wethers under 18 months of age, as it states here, some states require individual ID, as does Kentucky. And then sheep under 18 months of age may move as a mixed source, group, or lots in slaughter channels. Remember, it's slaughter only, with a group lot ID and an owner shipper hauler statement. Slaughter channels. What do I mean by slaughter channels? It may be a federal or state inspected slaughter establishment or custom exempt establishment for immediate slaughter. That means when those animals arrive there, they're not going to be sold to go somewhere else. They're actually going to be slaughtered at the place. It also includes animals that are going to an individual for immediate slaughter for personal use. Also, and there are none of these in Kentucky, but there are some restricted livestock facility or sales that are slaughter only. All of our livestock markets in Kentucky at this time are actually, some animals can leave there and go into breeding facilities. We do not have a restricted livestock facility or sale. And they also can, if they are moving to an approved terminal feedlot, in other words, they're going to a feedlot, say you've got some young feeder kids that are 30 to 40 pounds and they're going to go to a feedlot from a premise, from the owner is selling them straight to a feedlot, not going through a livestock market, but he's selling straight to a feedlot, then they can go on an owner shipper statement. Getting back with record keeping, this is extremely important with scrapie surveillance. A record must be made when official ID is applied to a sheep and goat, or when you purchase a sheep and goat, or when one of them dies on your farm. Records must be kept for a minimum of 5 years if a veterinarian applies official ID, the animals were ID'd at a market, ID'd by a dealer, owners, or agents. Anybody that applies official ID must keep these records for 5 years. What about if you take a sheep and goat across the state line and they're not going into slaughter channels or going to a federally approved market? Must have an interstate certificate of veterinary inspection, which has been issued by an accredited veterinarian. That is a requirement nationwide. If you cross the state lines and you're especially going to an exhibit, it's imperative. Within Kentucky, we require an ICVI for in-state shows, and once again, those CVIs, or intrastate CVI, is good for the calendar year for the animals that are listed on the CVI. So how do we apply these official IDs safely and securely? That's really kind of important. If you just remember that, do not buy or sell a sheep or goat over 18 months of age, especially, for any purpose unless they have an official ID. Don't leave a farm. Say you're buying a group of ewe lambs. Don't leave the farm unless they have been scrapie tagged. They've had an official scrapie tag applied. Especially important to not buy or sell sexually intact sheep and goats under 18 months that are not officially identified unless they are moving directly to a slaughter facility. So if you go and you want to purchase a group of 70 to 80 pound hair lambs or goats and you're taking them straight to slaughter, then you can move them on an owner shipper statement. You don't have to officially identify them, but they cannot go anywhere but to that slaughter establishment that you have identified on the owner shipper statement. Some of these official ID devices and methods, official ear tags, including like I said, there's some RFIDs. Shearwell is a company that is the only company I know of that is marketing official scrapie tags that are RFID ear tags within the United States. There's also group lot identification, flock ID tattoos, registry tattoos, electronic implantable devices. They're called EIDs. Implants is what we call, is what I'm talking about there. There's also registered brands and ear notches. I don't know of any within Kentucky. Back tags, we've discussed that. They really aren't being applied to anything but earless goats and mean bucks from here on out. They are not considered official. Now a market can use back tags, but when they move those animals, unless they're going straight to slaughter, they are not considered official. And the official ear tags on the neck straps. This is an example of a Scrapie tag. As you can see, it has a U.S. shield. That is extremely important for all official IDs. Must have that U.S. shield. So if you don't have Scrapie tags and you want to purchase them, once again, here's the number. And earlier, and the number, if you're in Kentucky, you can call the 502-848-2054 number. That's USDA to get your flock ID. I would recommend that once you get your flock ID, then unless you want the free, you're a new producer and want the free tags, I would probably say go ahead and contact Allflex, Premier One, some of the other tag manufacturers that provide Scrapie tags. You will get them faster. I've heard too many stories where people have ordered them and something falls through the cracks or something, and it may take 2 to 3 weeks or even longer. If you call the tag manufacturers, they generally will have your tags within the week. You'll have them at your farm. Once again, these are some of the manufacturers. Allflex, Premier, Shearwell is the one that's providing the RFID tags. Metal tags are through National Band and Tag Company. But you've got to have your flock ID before you can order the plastic tags, and you must have your PIN number to order the RFID tags. This here is the website that lists the tag manufacturers, their phone numbers, their websites. Very, very thorough document. And I highly recommend going to this website if you want to order your own tags. You can even the plastic tags you can specialize, and they don't cost that much more to maybe you want to put your flock number, your flock name, or identify that way. You can do that. All right, so what contributes to optimal ear tag retention, minimize infection, and tissue reaction? Obviously, the first thing is the ideal placement location. Then try to tag lambs and kids that are less than 6 months of age. Try to do it, don't tag the lambs and kids when they're brand new, newborns. Let the mother lick them off and clean them off and apply it after the ears are dry. You can pre-dip the tag stem in lubricant at the time of tagging, which may help, especially if it has some type of antiseptic with it. Place the female portion of the tag on the inside of the ear. It's the portion that is a little bit taller than, it's not the flat button. The flat button you want to be on the outside of the ear. Gives less for that animal to catch it on a fence or something like that. And then avoid tagging in the humid summer months when possible. Here's an example of the ideal placement of a plastic tag. As you can see down here, you can see the raised, this is called the female, and the back side is called the male side. And it's flat. It has the stem, okay? But this is the ideal placement of these Scrapie tags in the animals. Always try to put it in the left ear too. The shears, no, especially with metal tags. Metal tags will tear a blade, the sheep shearers really get frustrated when their clippers hit these metal tags and take a tooth off of a clipper blade, which creates a problem. And if you're going to use metal tags, make sure that they're a third of the way from the ear base, and always put them in the left ear. And what is the shearers are learning that to avoid that left ear when they're shearing. And by doing that, we can maybe, save some clippers. Once again, here's some more examples of how these tags can be applied. As you notice down here, the metal tag is applied. You can either apply it on the bottom of the ear or the top of the ear, preferably the bottom. And here's just some more examples of official USDA tags. This is a metal one. Here's a specialized Scrapie tag for a flock. This is the male. You can see the flat male part of this tag. And this here, we see a lot of sheep come into the markets, and the owners think that they're a Scrapie tag. As you can see, there's no U.S. shield on that tag anywhere. It is not an official ID. In the goats, again, about a third of the way from the base of the ear, you can see this is the female side. You want to put that on the inside of the ear. Once again, for earless sheep and goats, affix it to a strap or collar so that it cannot be removed except by being cut, or a back tag can be applied on the pole. So a group lot ID is allowed in lieu of an individual ID when accompanied by an owner shipper statement or hauler statement. Once again, for animals in slaughter channels less than 18 months of age, and in animals in slaughter channels greater than 18 months of age, must be kept in a group with animals from the same flock of birth. They cannot be commingled throughout the marketing process, and must be kept separate if you're going to move them on a owner shipper statement. And once again, if you want to move them for grazing purposes, you can do this without. They don't have to be individually ID'd. They just cannot be commingled. And it's extremely important that you can move them on an owner shipper statement. Okay, I want to briefly touch on registry tattoos. Sheep or goats that are only identified with an official tattoo or electronic implanted ID must be ear tagged if moved through a market, unless it is a special breeding stock sale where the tattoos and EIDs will be documented, for example, on the registration certificate. Once again, if they're just going through a regular livestock market, registry tattoos do not work. They must be officially identified with an ear tag. Registration tattoos may be used to officially identify individual sheep and goats moving without transfer of ownership or for sale if the association registry premises or flock tattoo prefix is linked in the National Scrapie database to the APHIS assigned premises identification number and flock ID number of the flock of birth, or the registry's tattoos have been approved by USDA. In other words, such as American Dairy Goat Association is linked with the Scrapie database, as is all the breed registries in sheep, Kiko's, pretty much every sheep and goat registry is linked with the Scrapie database. The one thing that is important is that tattoo must be legible. It must be legible, and it must match up with the registration certificate, which must be accompanied by the animal. And once again, this is only if this is a special sale, doesn't apply for just regular livestock markets. But the copy of the registration certificate must accompany the animal. Animals under 60 days of age can have a copy of a completed application for registration. That means that animals has been applied for registration, and it has been stamped by the association, and a duplicate has been given back to the owner. If you do get an interstate certificate of veterinary inspection, it will list the flock of origin and birth, the registry, and the registration tattoo. Here's an example of a tattoo that's easily legible and the registration certificate that accompanies it. The tattoo on the bottom is not, it is just another example, but it's not an example of the registration certificate. Here's a Saanen dairy goat, and as you can see, she's tattooed with V316, and you can see it on the registration certificate. Some of the goat identification problems is you need to remember that registration tattoos is a privilege. These tattoos, you must be able to be read, and the owners must assist with the tattoo reading process if they're not easily legible. If they want to, they may have to provide light to put behind the ear or something like that to assist with reading. And they must match up with the registration papers and must have accurate acquisition and disposition records. The owners must. In other words, if they're stating that they're the owner, but on that registration certificate it says somebody else is an owner, that's not applicable. That cannot, because that animal could be possibly stolen. So the registration certificate must be in the seller's name, or have a document that states that that the seller is authorized to sell this animal for another individual. Any breeding animal must be traceable to the herd of origin. They must, a registration certificate states where the animal was born at. So that's very important. When you put an electronic identification device in the ear, must be placed between the skin and the cartilage of the back side of the ear, near where the ear joins the head, or between the skin and the bone of the tail near the base of the tail. Those are the only two places that an electronic implantable device can be put. That also, if an EID is put into an animal, it must be tattooed with a legible E if the implant is at the base of the ear, or an ET if the implant is in the tail fold. The tattoo must be at least 0.3 inches high in the ear, or in the case of earless animals, must be in the tail fold. Records required of persons who purchase, acquire, sell, or dispose of animals. You must keep track of the number of animals purchased or sold, date of the purchase, sale, or other transfer, and the name and address of the person from whom the animals were purchased or otherwise acquired, or to whom they were sold or otherwise transferred. This is extremely important in the case of a disease outbreak or doing a scrapie disease traceback. We've got to know where these animals came from in order to identify any other animals that might have been exposed or may be offspring of that animal that was positive for scrapie. As stated earlier, if you don't know the breed, if the breed is not completely known, just for sheep, the face color, whether they're wool, whether they're hair sheep, and with goats, whether they're milk goats, fiber goats, or meat goats. If you are a state that has a brand inspection certificate, a copy of that must be included in identifying the brands or the ear notches. And then a copy of any certificate or ownership or statement required for movement of the animals should be kept. Also need to keep track of the flock identification number, of the flock of origin of the animals that you purchased, which should be on the scrapie tag, and the name and address of the person who currently owns the animals, and the name and address of the owner of the flock of origin, if they're different. Also, you need to have a name and address of owner of the flock of birth, if known, for any animals that were born after January 1st, 2002 in another flock and not already identified to flock of birth. Some other records that you may want to keep is the date the animals were officially identified. I always write down, anytime I tag an animal, I write down when it was born, what sex it was, what it weighed, and what its scrapie tag is going to be. The number of the sheep and the number of goats identified for a specific day. Breed and class of the animals, we already talked about that. If a tag is lost, I have this question a lot. So what if you have a breeding animal that has lost their tag, because they do lose them? Try to replace it as soon as possible with another official tag. Record the number that you put in, and if you know if you were keeping good records, you should have the old tag somewhere in your database, and always what they call marry it up. In other words, match her old tag with the new tag. So always try to write down the previous tag number, and then try to write down the name and address of where she came from or he came from. This is just an example of a chart that you could make. You can make up, there's so many ways you could do this. But this is just a simple chart that the number of animals that you sold or disposed, the date you sold them, where you sold them at, and if you can, write down the numbers, the official IDs in their ears. Just, anytime an animal dies or is sold off of your farm, have some type of record that shows where they went. And if an animal loses its number, then this is another chart showing how you could, just very simply identify that animal. And all this is in case you have a disease. It's always good to keep track of records. It also lets you know how old this animal is. I keep records from year to year as to how many offspring she had, how her offspring performed. Because I don't know if you're like me, I can't remember what I had for lunch the day before. So it's always important for me to keep records. Hope this has helped clarify some issues. This PowerPoint was taken from a PowerPoint that the University of Minnesota Sheep and Goat Industries put together through the help of NIAA and the National Scrapie Eradication Program. So if you ever want to look at the complete PowerPoint demonstration, just get a hold of them, and because I just briefly touched on some of the things that we require in Kentucky. But the last thing you want to do is do what this sheep is doing, is pull a 5-gallon bucket over your head and don't look or hear about anything. So hope this helps, and if you ever need any questions or have some problems with the scrapie identification, just give me a call.